Good morning. So thrilled to be here with this group of folks and this expert panel. My name is Kyle Bollier. I'm a city councilor in Lafayette, Colorado. I also am a co-director of the Alliance for Competitive Elections, a nonprofit that works on strengthening democracy reform here in Colorado. This panel is focused on democracy reform, civic activism, and advocacy in Colorado. We're going to introduce the panelists in a moment, and then we're going to kind of call an audible and both speak to the room, but also for posterity for the recording. So thank you all so much for being here. So I have the privilege to introduce Beth Hendrix, the Executive Director for the League of Women Voters, Mike Cortés, the Executive Director of CLLARO. CLLARO is the Colorado Latino Leadership Advocacy and Research Organization, and Tony Haas of Veterans for All Voters. He's the state volunteer organizer here in Colorado. So in a moment, I'm going to turn to them to introduce themselves further, their organizations, what they're keen to tackle. But just two quick comments at the top. So Colorado's primary ballots went out in the mail yesterday. For folks who are not familiar, Colorado has a pretty innovative and forward-leaning approach to ballot access. We allow unaffiliated voters, which is the majority of Colorado voters are unaffiliated. We allow unaffiliated voters to vote for either the Democratic or Republican primary ballots. You have to pick one, but you can vote in either. What Colorado doesn't do as a state is send you a ballot for the Libertarian Party or the Forward Party or the Green Party. So there's some access issues right there. We are seeing a moment in our country with extraordinary hunger for democratic and civic reform, and Colorado is frequently touted as a national leader with ballot access, mail-in voting, et cetera, which is something we as Coloradans can be very proud of. At the same time, poll after poll shows that Coloradans, particularly young Coloradans, do not have significant faith or trust in their democratic and civic institutions. So a partner organization for all of us is Courageous Colorado. This is an initiative focused on transforming our state's democracy. And Courageous Colorado has talked about the Colorado democracy paradox, where on the one hand, we have these exceptional noted institutions and very progressive access. And on the other hand, poll after poll shows that people don't necessarily believe these institutions are working for them. So we're going to unpack that together as a panel. So that's enough from me. Let's turn to the panelists to dig in. Beth, I'm going to ask you to go first, please. Thanks, Mike. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, the League of Women Voters needs no introduction, but if you could just tell us a little bit about how you are seeing this present moment.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. My name is Beth Hendrix. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. And for more than a century, the League has operated under a very simple premise that our democracy works best when all voters are engaged, active, informed, and heard. That is becoming more and more difficult in this divided political climate. I believe that the political polarization is one of the biggest obstacles and barriers. Disagreement is healthy. Disagreement is necessary for a democracy. Our founders set up the system so that we could debate and disagree and ideally come to consensus. But when we are looking across the aisle and seeing enemies rather than fellow citizens who love our country just as much as we do, there's a big problem.
Thank you so much, Beth. Mike, please.
Good morning. I'm Mike Cortés. I serve as President and CEO of, this is a long one, Colorado Latino Leadership Advocacy and Research Organization. And it's long enough that's why we really call ourselves CLLARO. We were started 62 years ago. Back then when we were formed, we were the Latin American Research and Service Agency. I think we called it that because we liked the acronym, which was La Raza. So we've done many things over the past 62 years. We were the first nonprofit 501c3 tax-exempt public charity controlled, led by Latinos serving Latinos in Colorado. Now there's more than 125 organizations around the state, and we like working with them all, and we're much more focused on public policy and helping Latino communities across the state empower themselves politically, economically, socially. We focus very much on politically. And that's our concern, especially these days. Nationally and statewide, and in too many of our local communities, Latinos have too little to say about legislative and policy decisions that affect their communities. So we are dedicated to making democracy work for Latinos. We believe in democracy, imperfect though it is under our current constitution. It always needs work. And the work that we want to do is to help Latinos be players in what's supposed to be representative democracy. Sorry about my phone.
Thanks so much, Mike. Tony, please, sir.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Haas, and as Kyle said, I'm the state volunteer organizer for an organization called Veterans for All Voters. Veterans for All Voters is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, nationwide organization, much younger than the two organizations represented by these two to my right. But we seek to organize, educate, and mobilize a community of veterans, veteran military families, and veteran supporters to advocate for reforms that make our politics less toxic and our government more responsive and more effective. We think that the veteran perspective is not necessarily unique, but I think we have a particular perspective in that, you know, when you join the military, you don't necessarily get to choose the members of your platoon or squad, right? You're there with whoever they are, wherever they came from, and whatever, you know, biases and experiences they brought with them. But what you do is you agree on values and goals, and you bring everybody together. You acknowledge differences, but you agree to work together to achieve those values and goals. And we think that we could use a little bit more of that kind of attitude in our civic engagement in our government today, too.
Thank you so much to the three of you. So, folks, as you see, we have an outstanding panel. I think we had more questions, but what we're going to do, we called an audible. I'm going to ask a couple questions, and the team will answer it, and then we'll really turn it to you to have a discussion with you in terms of how you're seeing democracy in Colorado in this moment. So the first question at the outset, I mean, you've heard we have very different constituencies, political traditions represented, younger organizations, older organizations, deep ties in different aspects of the community. So my question, and Mike, I think I'll start with you. My question is, how do you, in your organization, view cross-partisan collaboration as an effective means for addressing your overall strategic goals? And where have you seen single-focused partisan efforts on a policy plank? Where have you seen that go awry?
I think it's vitally important that we, as a nonpartisan organization, work in cross-partisan coalitions. Neither party should be taking us for granted. And that's been happening too much for the past, throughout the history of this state. So if we really want to get things done, particularly in the legislative arena, which is where we focus a lot of our attention here in Colorado, we have to work in coalitions. And more we can make that bipartisan, multi-partisan, nonpartisan doesn't happen much at the Capitol, but to try to be as inclusive as possible in terms of potential supporters, the better. We ran with an idea that came out of a conversation at Courageous Colorado last fall when we got together in Colorado Springs and dreamed of making democracy better in a variety of very specific ways. And one of the issues that came up was, I don't know if how many of you vote in Colorado and filled out ballots? Toward the kind of down ballot, you'll find statewide initiatives and referenda. And my hunch is that you may not have enjoyed reading what those things supposedly were trying to do, if you could decipher them. Very, very legalistic. So an idea that came out of Courageous Colorado that CLLARO decided to run with was there ought to be a law that the ballots that is understandable to the majority of our voters. And so we worked with members of the legislature. We wanted to make it bipartisan in terms of sponsorship. That was not easy to do. we ended up with Democratic Party sponsors. The bill was introduced that would require that ballot measures be written in plain language. We got the bill passed. It goes into effect on August 12th. And we have a lot of people to thank for that. But we wanted to be nonpartisan in our approach. Legally, we have to be nonpartisan as a nonprofit organization, kind of tax exemption that we have according to federal law and state law. But we found that Republicans were kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouths. In the hearings that we had before legislative committees, some opposed, some were maybe persuadable. They talked to us afterwards and say, you know, this looks like a really good idea. But on the floor of the House and on the Senate, especially the House, they opposed it. And it was not because it wasn't because they were fundamentally opposed to the idea. Our bill happened to be one of those that tactically they decided to use it to try to slow down the debate process so that fewer bills would get passed because they were in a minority, and the more bills they stopped from getting passed because the time runs out, the more they could, the fewer losses they would have in the legislature. So our bill kind of became a victim of tactical activity that didn't have anything to do with the merits of the bill. But we stuck to our guns. We had a coalition of 26 organizations who endorsed the bill. I think that's why it got passed. The governor didn't seem to mind it. He signed it. And so we really need to be able to put together coalitions where we're not taking sides in the exceedingly polarized legislature that we have these days. And in a time when our politics are way too polarized, it's time to find ways to reach across the aisle, stick to our guns if we get caught in the crossfire, as we did on this bill, but not become part of the problem, but try to continue to work on being as nonpartisan and cross-partisan as possible in order to get things done.
Thank you, Mike. Beth, please.
Well, the rules governing our elections must belong to all voters and not just one political faction. That's the only way that voters can and will have trust. It's as simple as that. Multi-partisan groups must come together. Mike had a great description, but it's as simple as that. Election rules belong to all voters, not just one party.
Thank you, Beth. Tony.
I mean, plus one to everything that Mike and Beth both said. And Mike's example of the bill that just got passed this session is a really, really good illustration of that. I think it's important not to just have a cross-partisan coalition, a cross-partisan effort. But I mean, just look at the panel today. We have CLLARO, the League of Women Voters, Veterans for All Voters, all these different kind of constituencies involved as well, right? I retired from the Army like 2 years ago and kind of got right into doing this democracy reform thing. And I was kind of surprised at first when I was introduced to all these different sort of what you might call affinity or kind of identity-based groups. And I was like, that's great, but like there was something about it that felt almost exclusive to me. Like if I'm not Latino, like is CLLARO for me? If I'm not a woman, is the League of Women Voters for me? Turns out they are. In fact, they very much are, right? But I sort of shifted my frame about it, and instead of thinking of them as sort of these exclusive categories, someone explained it last week as they're all just different doors. They're just different ways for everybody to learn about and come into this work, right? I'm going to abuse or kind of mangle a metaphor here a little bit, but I kind of think of them all as like little mountain streams feeding into a creek, and then that creek, is feeding eventually into a big river of change, right? So it's important. That's why the broad base is important, right? And it builds broader trust as well across people too.
Thank you so much. I love that metaphor, particularly since we're in drought conditions right now. So I think we can explore that a little bit further. I'm going to take off the moderator's hat for just one moment and put on my hat as a co-director for the Alliance for Competitive Elections. We are the youngest nonprofit on this table. We're less than a year old, but the observations that Tony, Beth, and Mike have shared have really rung true in our work with the smaller political parties across the state of Colorado. Many of them, Forward, Libertarians, Center, are registered legal political parties. And quite a few, the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, the Greens, not the Greens, Working Families Party, et cetera, are more, I would categorize as advocacy activist organizations. They're not actually registered legal parties. So they don't compete in elections. This is fascinating to me. And so at ACE, we train these smaller political parties to be more competitive. We offer them some strategic guidance, because many of us are former USAID, democracy and governance folks who worked overseas, strengthening political parties abroad. And so it's been fascinating to bring some of that expertise at home and invest locally. And it won't surprise this group that a majority of Colorado's races are uncontested. People running without opposition. That's fascinating. And that's something that we can collectively work on. And, you know, the primary ballots have gone out. A lot of those Democratic, Republican primary ballots uncontested. So even within the party, there's not contestation. And so to Beth's point earlier in terms of the rules need to work for all of us, so too do the parties and the elected officials. But time after time, as Coloradans, we get one choice. So that's something we'll unpack a little bit further. The next kind of round of questions for the panel, I think, and then we'll turn to the group, hangs on essentially what you're most excited about. So just for context, last week, we and other folks were hosted by Courageous Colorado up in Leadville for like a democracy deep dive. So it was a few days of really rolling up our sleeves, hearing presentations on what works and what doesn't. Many of us saw the news recently with the California primary, with the 60 odd folks on that primary ballot. So there's some things we don't want to do, but there's also some things we're very excited about. So Beth, I'm going to Tony, I'm going to go to you first. I've been picking on Beth. What are you most excited about in terms of democracy reform in Colorado? Be that ranked choice voting, open primaries. What speaks to you? What gets you and your organization most excited?
So there's a whole menu of reforms that Veterans for All Voters is super excited about. Like I said, we're a nationwide organization, so we do whatever we feel like is kind of needed the most in a given context or state or jurisdiction, whether that's you're getting dark money out of politics, independent redistricting, anti-gerrymandering, open primaries, ranked choice vote, whatever the world of possibility is in a given place. That's what we are supportive of, right? But what I'm most excited about is not any one particular reform, really, but the fact that these conversations are happening more and more, and they're getting bigger and bigger, and becoming kind of more mainstream, right? And the momentum is building, and people are asking more questions about, wait, why do the primaries work this way? Wait, why don't we regulate the way spending is done in campaigns? People are paying attention, and that's what I think is really exciting me the most. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. Beth, please.
I think I am most excited that proportional representation is becoming more widely discussed and more seen as a real possibility. That will mandate a lot of change, but it will result in voters truly being represented and a more diverse body in terms of perspective, gender, race, ideology. And right now, that's not happening in Colorado.
I'm excited that we're even having these conversations. I mean, what really matters to me most is that, as far as I'm concerned, our constitutional form of representative democracy is in constant need of improvement and adjusting to the times. But I've been around long enough that I've actually seen some progress, and even now when it's under threat strategically from some interested parties, a lot of them congregating around Washington, D.C., we're talking about strategies for the future and making it better. When, I'm going to date myself now, it used to be that you had to be 21 to vote. That's the way it was when I was a college student. And so in 1966, when I turned 21, I registered for a party that nobody outside of Berkeley, California had ever heard of. but it reflected my views. I realized that I wasn't going to be voting in primaries as a result of my choice of parties, and that needed fixing. There are a few things that needed fixing, so I eventually signed up with one of the big parties because at least I get to vote in the primaries. But I've seen progress. Back then, young men were being drafted when they turned 18 to fight in the Vietnam War, but were not being allowed to vote until they were 21. We've made some progress. Back then, we got in trouble with the university because we were doing civil rights advocacy off campus, trying to make it illegal to discriminate in employment and voting decisions based on race, because back then it was legal. And we were raising money for voter registration work in the South. Some of us were volunteering down there. We were demonstrating against employers who in those days could advertise in the want ad section of the paper. There was no internet, of course, for certain jobs for certain races. And so in the Oakland Tribune, the want ads were segregated. And these were the jobs for white folks. These are the jobs for women. These were the jobs, that's now illegal. So I'm seeing improvement over the course of my lifetime. I'm counting on improvement over the course of your lifetimes, because there's still a lot of work left to be done. Political parties, I think, have really gotten in the way of true democracy. And that's, I think, our next big project.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Mike. All right, folks, we're going to jump into the crowd. So if I could, please. If I could harvest a couple questions or comments from folks. Sir.
Hi, my name is Andrew. I work at Mile High United Way in Denver. We do a lot of policy and advocacy there. I'm curious, obviously money in politics is a really big issue at the national level. I wonder how it, factors into the local level.
Others.
My name is Casey Moore. I'm the executive director of the Denver Council on Foreign Relations. I have a very quick one. Proportional representation or ranked choice voting?
I'm a member. Thank you for being here.
I'm Celeste Gardner with GlobalMindED, and I wonder why, as a lifelong Coloradan, it's so easy to get things on the ballot, and some things that are such complicated issues. Some years ago, we had to vote on a big healthcare issue, and I thought we elect our representatives to hash out these things. This is their job, and it's very difficult for people to become sophisticated enough to read. I'm an interested voter, and I felt like I couldn't properly make the decision because you guys, not you guys, but our publicly represented, that's their job as legislators, is to look at all that, and they have people to discuss all that and come to the right decisions. It's difficult, I think, it's I don't understand why it's so easy to get stuff on the ballot that we get to decide that the legislator should do. It's a low bar to get something on the ballot. That's a good point.
And thank you for having us to GlobalMindED.
How are you going to remember all these? Okay. My question is, Lawrence Ford Conscious Capital Foundation. My question is, I was going to ask that question about money, but how about access to voting and your thoughts around access as it relates to verification of identification all the way to digital access for voting?
And just to add to that, just in general, the effects of technology on this as a process going forward, and dare I say AI.
Thank you very much. All right, so we've got AI, access to voting, PR or RCV, the influence of money at the national level and local politics. And I want to make sure I capture your question comment. It's sort of like, let me reframe it and see if this hits. Are state legislators punting some of their responsibility to us and the voters for citizen initiatives? Okay, too low a bar to get things on the statewide ballot. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. That's right. So I have a couple ways that we can approach this, and maybe open it up to the panel to respond to a couple questions at a time, or all three. How do folks feel?
Is there one that we want to go with first?
I mean, I think
They're all very good and very intimidating, to be honest. But
I'd say let's take the tech one first, because I know there's quite a few AI-focused, technology-focused conversations happening at this conference, and then grow from there. So maybe technology and AI in our politics.
I'll give it a stab. All right. So I think about this issue the way I think about a lot of very complicated and kind of emerging issues that we don't really have a whole lot of data on or experience with yet. In that, this may sound a little bit like a cop-out, but I think what we need to do is we need systems and processes to get the right people into the right positions to have real intelligent conversations about these very big issues, right? So I don't know if there's, and I'm certainly not a tech expert, right? So I couldn't speak to like specific technical solutions for the threat of AI in our politics or anything like that. But I can say we do need smart people acting in good faith to set those policies, and we need a better way to select those people to make those decisions. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Mike.
I would add to that. I agree. I think we've lost a lot of faith in major institutions, including our state legislature. But they're decisions that really ought to be made through deliberation and negotiation and careful hearings and informed advocacy groups that can bring research to bear on issues. That process is not working as well as it should in a highly polarized state legislature. One of the things that I'm excited about is the possibility of changing the incentives for legislators so that they're less likely to punt to the electorate for issues they ought to be dealing with. And they're more likely to reach across the aisle and across factions to see if they can work something out. An incentive for doing that is to change the rules about how they're elected. I didn't realize this was going to be a history lesson, but back in 1966, when I was a student, our student government tried ranked choice voting. And it really worked well. And it meant that there was an incentive for candidates not to attack each other. Because if the electorate, in those days the student body, were able to rank them and they came in second, do they want to be on record as having attacked the first and the third? Or, you know, they want to hedge your bets and not burn all your bridges when you're campaigning. If you might be part of a ranked choice voting exercise. We need more of that in our state legislature today. Willingness to not go on the attack, not to create incentives for extreme fringe groups to dominate what should be people who are trying to find a middle way that most of us can live with, because that's part of what a good legislature should be doing when they're writing policy. So whether it's going to be ranked choice voting, whether it's going to be pluralism where we have multi-member districts, those are different strategies, but they both tend to do the same kinds of things. Which one is it going to be? I don't know. As a pragmatist, I'd say whichever one we can get adopted. Any of that would be progress in terms of cutting down on the polarization and having the legislature do their job.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think, Casey, that begins to respond to some of your question. And just for me personally, because I'm with you, whichever gets us closer. But if I had my druthers and had to push the button, I would push RCV, because I think RCV gets us closer to proportional. And I'm curious, Beth, what you think, how you would approach that. And then maybe I'm very curious for your thoughts on Celeste's comment in terms of the ease of putting things on the ballot.
I think we need both proportional representation and ranked choice voting. I think they work together. And I actually disagree that it's easy to get something on the ballot, having failed this year to do that. So, you got to jump through hoops, and you've got to get about 200,000 signatures and 2% have to come from each of Colorado's 35 Senate districts. So I actually disagree that the bar is low. I hear what you're saying about wacky things getting on the ballot because of citizen initiative. Right now there are initiatives circulating for signatures that will allow Colorado to secede from the United States of America and form its own country. And the Colorado Constitution would be the law of the land. I think that's wacky. But citizens got it through the title board, and now they're looking for signatures. And if they get enough signatures, it'll go before the voters. And hey, that is true democracy. That is direct democracy. And I appreciate that Colorado gives voters that opportunity and not just put it on our elected representatives.
Thank you.
AI, I think, needs to be regulated better in elections. We passed a law here in Colorado outlawing AI in electioneering, but we've seen the damage it can do at the federal level.
Thank you, Beth. I want to come back briefly to something Tony mentioned earlier in terms of paying for the signatures, because this isn't necessarily something that's widely known. So just want, if you could touch on that, and then I'll just kind of add. So I ran for election this past November for the city council. I lost. I came up very, very close. So I got an appointment when there was a resignation. I'm a 40-year-old white man who spent his career in the federal government. The running for election was designed for someone like me. And I found it to be a soul-crushing, painful, challenging process where the bureaucracy just grinds you down. And it strikes me, in particular thinking of CLLARO's lens on things, how hard it must be for people who don't have the advantages I have. And one thing that's so striking to me, Celeste, is that our state legislators are not paid well. Right? So it's sort of, we're in this weird spot where they work only a chunk of the year, they make $45K plus or minus. And yet they have this huge responsibility to govern our state, and then are challenged by wacky initiatives. And I think the initiatives prejudicing against trans folks are on the ballot now. I think those have made it there. I'm just in Pride Month. So I take your point. But Tony, I've given you enough time to come up with an answer. So wondering what your thoughts on that.
So just going to the question of the ballot initiatives again. I mentioned you can't pay for signatures, but you can absolutely pay circulators and signature collectors, petitioners, and a lot of the crazy stuff that you see make it to the ballot are typically backed by folks or organizations that have a fairly deep war chest to go and pay for those circulators to get that out there, right? So if you are an individual citizen, I think to Beth's point, and you feel strongly about something in your community does, it's very, very difficult for those people to organize organically and get something onto the ballot. Very difficult. But if you are, a well-funded advocacy organization and you can, pay a couple hundred circulators to go out and hang out at like farmers markets and stuff, then it's a little bit easier, right? But to your point of way too many things being decided on the ballot instead of in the State House, I completely agree. And I think the number of ballot measures that you see every year is a signal of an appetite for better leadership in the General Assembly, right? If we were getting things done, we wouldn't need to read through 24 ballot initiatives. The Denver ballot, I think, was like 3 pages front and back in the last the 2024 election. It's too much to ask of a voter. I completely agree with that.
Thank you so much, Tony. And I'm going to channel the audience and ask when you're running for office.
Not anytime soon, Kyle.
Does some of this touch on your question in terms of the money in politics? Maybe we can dig into that a little bit further. But just wondering if there's any other questions from the audience that we could explore. I've got a pile in my notebook for us to dig into. Please.
I'm curious about like any advice for getting involved in local politics more, running for a city council position or anything like that.
Great question. Beth, do you want to start in terms of advice for folks who want to run for office or get involved in local politics?
Do it. Absolutely do it. A healthy democracy thrives on engaged citizenry. it is challenging, as has been noted, and depending on what office you're choosing, it can be a bit soul crushing, but representing in a democracy, I believe, is one of the biggest privileges that a person can have. So, start building your coalition now, and start working to raise the pay of legislators. As Kyle noted, the state legislature is considered a part-time job because it only runs from January to May. But all the work gets done in the off session. And so to call it a part-time job is ridiculous. And that's the point. That's their reasoning for paying so low. Well, it's a part-time job. $45,000 for a part-time job isn't bad. True. It's not a part-time job, and especially for women who are traditionally caregivers, with children and parents. It's unfair. It's unjust, and we gotta make it possible for more people to run.
I'm counting on you to run for office. Because there's just so much more that needs to be done, and it ought to be done by the state legislature. At CLLARO, we have a program, might be of interest to some of you. It's called the CLLARO Capital Fellowship Program. And it's for college students. They're usually in their junior year, awful lot of them, but not all of them are political science majors. But they're really interested in community service and how legislation can make a difference in their own communities. And we award fellowships that place them 20 hours a week working in the Capitol in legislators' offices. And some of them are also placed in advocacy groups and sometimes executive branch agencies that deal with the legislature, occasionally a city council that deals with the legislature. But the idea is they're there for the entire session. They learn how the sausage is made, and we bring in guest speakers on a variety of issue areas and process issues. The whole idea is to not only help them understand how the decisions are really made, but also get them in the Capitol long enough they can say, I could do this, and run for office or become one of the advocacy organizations that try to bring badly needed information into the legislative process where the decisions are being made. It warms the cockles of my old heart when I see our folks getting elected. Our most recent one was a Capitol Fellow who ran for the school board in the Boulder Valley School District, first Latina elected to that board. And she's in there making policy. And some have run on city council, some have done polling and other things related to elections, but I see them getting engaged civically. Ignore what you said about the low pay. Yeah, that needs fixing too. And we're counting on you to do that. My gray hair appeals to you. Please, you got to pick up where we're leaving off, because there's so much more to make democracy work the way it should.
And maybe a ballot initiative to raise legislator pay?
Tony, I'd love your thoughts as well on the question from Andrew in terms of advice for getting involved, whether running for office or local politics. But I also, just to build on one of Mike's points, nothing will disabuse you of imposter syndrome more than spending time around elected, appointed officials. Truly. Absolutely. I mean it. Yeah, please welcome your thoughts.
You can absolutely do this. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like a bit of a fraud talking about giving advice for running for office when Kyle's already exposed my own cowardice in doing so, right? Yeah, I would say, just to kind of echo the other comments, find something that you're interested in and just start small. Join, an open Zoom call that they have with their members, whatever it is. If you're interested in running for office yourself, I would recommend volunteering to work on someone's campaign that is running for office first, so you can kind of see all the things that Kyle had to deal with in his city councilor's race, right? And yeah, like maybe start at the local or school board or county level, something like that, right? Just a little bit of exposure, and you'd be surprised how quickly it all kind of rubs off, and you sort of internalize it all and understand it and feel more comfortable kind of swimming in that water. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tony. I think we're coming up on time, so kind of oh, please, you have a follow-up.
I think I jinxed you when I said.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
It was the. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, it was the access for voting, and the real question was like, what kind of verification and process to actually get people to be able to vote. What are your thoughts on that?
Just to clarify, are you asking in terms of expanding the access or verifying that the people who are voting are who they say they are? To both? Okay, good question. So a question that I want to channel to the group, and I have some thoughts as well, is how do we think about voting access? So both expanding access to the ballot, and I know CLLARO and the League do a lot of this. You guys do as well, yeah.
A little bit with like military.
Yeah, so that on the access side, and then for voter verification in terms of the folks who vote, and as folks in this room probably all know, Colorado is very, very forward-leaning in terms of mail-in voting. So wondering for your thoughts on both the access side, expanding access, and then also on the security side, verifying that the folks who are voting are who they say they are.
There's a trade-off. Yes, we want the only voters to be people who are qualified to vote. But the more steps we take to invest in procedures that, are you for real really qualified to be submitting this ballot? The more it costs in terms of representative democracy. We've got to reach the right balance where everybody who's entitled to vote can do it without protective measures going in that tend to have a political bias. If you have to vote in person so they can check out your identity, you're probably taking time off from work unless we change the days that we have elections. Some folks can afford to do that more than others. So there's a bias that's introduced by these protective measures. Same thing on, you got to show your papers, your birth certificate or whatever, when you go to register, or more importantly, when you show up to vote. Some of us are better record keepers than others. Digging up my birth certificate that was issued 80 years ago, well, that's going to put some people at a disadvantage. So, yes, we want to protect the right to vote and make sure that the people who actually have the right are exercising it. But we don't want to invest too much in putting barriers, because each barrier has bias effects on outcomes. And I would hesitate to start getting real protective unless we had evidence that is a real problem. I've been watching this issue carefully because I care a lot about Latinos being able to vote. 81% of us are U.S. citizens here in Colorado, and we're looked at as if we were all immigrants. Some of us have families that go back to the 1600s in this part of the country, before it was part of the United States. And yet we're dismissed as, well, they're a bunch of immigrants. I had a fellow professor tell me when I was on the faculty at UCD that, they're all immigrants. She said all undocumented immigrants. None of that is true. And the evidence is not available. So, yeah, let's protect election integrity, but don't invest any more than we have to in ways that restrict access. Do it where it's obviously needed based on evidence. Otherwise, let people vote.
Thank you, Mike. Beth.
The League of Women Voters believes that photo ID mandates for voting are discriminatory. Simple as that. We do not believe that photo IDs should be mandated. Colorado has a long list of acceptable IDs that go from photo IDs down to utility bills. Our system is focused on attestation and that is perfectly fine. It's worked since voting began. And if you want to, voter fraud is so low that it's almost almost not there. There is no evidence that undocumented immigrants vote. The Heritage Foundation, the authors of Project 2025, they run an excellent website on voter fraud, and they post evidence of voter fraud. And their database has about 1,500 cases of voter fraud, of evidenced voter fraud since 2002 across local, state, and federal campaigns. 1,500 cases, okay, out of billions of votes cast. So this is an answer in search of a problem, and it is people in power wanting to stay in power by limiting access to the vote.
Thank you, Beth. Tony, please.
Yes. And I think there's a huge gap between how secure our elections and our voting process is and how it's often perceived, right? And I think the way that we can work to kind of close that gap, because as Beth and Mike have said, like, our selections are very secure. Like, any instance of voter fraud is so negligible as to really not be worth discussing, honestly. There you go. I was trying to help you out, Beth. Yeah. But as you know, our technology evolves, I can see a future not too distant from now where voting becomes far more digital, and we do it in a different way. And I would love to see us start having proactive conversations about the way to secure that, how to do like digital forensic audits to make sure that whatever technology we're using is accepted as legitimate and effective. So we should definitely start doing that now before it happens to us, right? But yeah, I think a way we can start to close that gap is sort of like Kyle said earlier about the fastest way to disabuse yourself of any imposter syndrome is to go watch, legislation in action. The quickest way to disabuse yourself of any concern about voter fraud is to go watch an election occurring. Go watch the votes being counted. There are ways to, it's easier in some jurisdictions than others, but there are ways to go observe ballots being counted. And I've talked to lots of people that have gone and done it, and almost universally when they come back, they go, what a really airtight system they got there. Like, it's clearly working, right?
Thank you so much, Tony. I would just add a couple things in terms of the access side, since I think we talked about the security side. On the access side, a few things I would love to see. One is that we in Colorado completely do away with any elections that are not in early November. There are still quite a few elections that are randomly sprinkled throughout the year, whether in odd years, even years, and we all know, and there's oodles of research to back this up, that an infinitesimal segment of society votes in those elections. So they're inherently unrepresentative. So I would want them all in November. The second thing, I would want those elections in November to be at least a state holiday, ideally a federal holiday, because to Mike's point earlier, a lot of folks can't afford to take that time. And democracy should be something that we effing celebrate rather than, I got to find a way to squeeze this in between all the other appointments. And then I think the third thing, in Lafayette's recent election in Boulder County, Boulder County has very high political representation and participation relative to the norm. But even so, in an odd year election, we had roughly 55% turnout. meaning 45% of Coloradans in overeducated, over-politically active Boulder County are still choosing not to participate in the vote. And so I think the question to Lawrence's comment is what can we do, what incentives can we offer to get people to be more engaged, more excited, and more willing to participate in their local democracy? So I know that we're at time, so I'm sorry to have to stop the conversation, but huge thanks to all of you for participating in a conversation. And a round of applause, please, to our outstanding panel, Mike Cortés, Beth Hendrix, and Tony Haas. Thank you all so much.